The battlefield stretched as far as the eye could see, a wasteland of broken Dominion war machines and the shattered remains of alien architecture. Smoke curled into the darkened sky, illuminated by the relentless bombardment from a orbit. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood on the command platform, her reinforced plating reflecting the flickering flames of war. A holographic display projected before her, showing updates of the ground assault. The counteroffensive had begun, and humanity was reclaiming one block at a time. She turned to her officers, her voice sharp and unwavering. Push forward. No more delays. I want that stronghold taken by nightfall. The officers nodded and relayed the command. Below, the streets of the fallen Dominion city were alive with the thunderous march of human forces. Soldiers in advance moved through the debris, their rifles humming with barely contained energy. Drones flitted above them, scanning for enemy movements. The Dominion resistance was scattered but desperate, their warriors unwilling to surrender despite overwhelming odds. Plasma fire streaked through the air, and explosions rattled the ruins, but the human advance was unstoppable. Sergeant Cole ducked behind a collapsed pillar as a Dominion sniper rained down fire from a broken tower. His squad took cover, exchanging glances as bullets sparked against their armor. Raptor team, take out that sniper, he ordered. A moment later, a rocket spiraled into the building, erupting in a fireball that sent Dominion debris scattering across the battlefield. The squad pressed forward, moving like a machine. As they advanced, a Dominion tank rumbled into the street, its cannon swiveling toward them. Cole barely had time to shout a warning before the ground shook with a deafening blast. The tank's shot missed, vaporizing a chunk of ruined wall beside them. Up front, he barked. A soldier hoisted a launcher onto his shoulder and fired, the rocket slamming into the tank's side. Fire and smoke belched from the vehicle as it sputtered and died. Above, squadrons of human gunships sailed over the city, unleashing hell upon the less fortified positions of the Dominion. Their barrage reduced alien bunkers to rubble, leaving nothing but scorched earth in their wake. Vasquez watched from the platform, her expression unreadable. Status, she demanded. A communications officer looked up from his console. The eastern sector is secure, ma'am. Resistance is collapsing across the board. Vasquez nodded, but she knew better than to be complacent. The Dominion had always been ruthless, and a cornered beast was the most dangerous kind. As if on cue, a transmission came through, urgent and filled with static. Admiral, we have movement from the underground tunnels. The Dominion is mobilizing something big. Vasquez stiffened. Deploy recon teams. I want to know what they're planning before they get the chance to use it. Miles away, deep beneath the ruined city, Dominion warlords gathered in a dimly lit command bunker. Their holographic displays flickered as they studied the advancing human forces. The leader, an imposing figure clad in dark crimson armor, clenched his fists. They think they have won, he growled. His advisors remained silent. They had lost the skies, lost their hold on the planet's surface. Their fleets had been torn apart by humanity's relentless assault. And yet, a final move remained. The warlord turned to his chief strategist. Activate the bombardment cannons. If we fall, no buns with us. The strategist hesitated. But sir, our own forces are already dead, the warlord snarled. If we cannot hold this world, neither shall they. Above ground, tremors rumbled through the city as ancient Dominion weapon platforms began to stir. Massive cannons, hidden beneath the ruins for centuries, emerged with mechanical groans. Dust and debris cascaded from their towering forms as they locked onto the human fleet above. The first shot roared into the sky, piercing the void with a beam of energy so powerful it sent shockwaves rippling through the clouds. A human destroyer in low orbit took the brunt of the blast, its hull splitting apart in a cascade of fire and matter. The ship broke in two, its remains spiraling toward the planet. Alarm klaxons blared across human command centers. Vasquez's eyes widened as the strategic map flashed red. What the hell just hit us? The communications officer frantically worked his console. It's coming from underground emplacements. The Dominion had these buried beneath the city. They must have been dormant until now. Vasquez gritted her teeth. All units, focus fire on those cannons. Bring them down before they cripple our fleet. On the ground, human artillery operators adjusted their targeting systems, locking onto the massive weapons rising from the ruins. The first salvo screamed through the air, striking the enemy positions with pinpoint accuracy. Explosions rippled across the landscape, but the Dominion cannons held firm, their reinforced armor absorbing the worst of the assault. The battle had taken a deadly turn. If those weapons weren't neutralized soon, the entire fleet would be in jeopardy. Sergeant Cole and his squad were already moving, weaving through the wreckage as they closed in on one of the towering cannons. We need to plant charges on the power cores, he said, pushing forward under a hail of enemy fire. Dominion defenders had rallied around the massive structure, pouring plasma bolts into the advancing humans. Cole's soldiers moved with precision, cutting through enemy lines with disciplined efficiency. As they reached the base of the cannon, an alien officer charged at them, wielding a massive blade crackling with energy. Cole barely had time to react before the warrior lunged, swinging the blade in a deadly arc. He dodged just in time, feeling the heat of the weapon pass inches from his face. He fired, the plasma bolts striking the officer's chest, sending him sprawling. Set the charges now, he barked. His demolitions expert worked quickly, affixing explosives to the cannon's power supply. The enemy pressed in from all sides, determined to stop them, but the humans held their ground. Detonating in 5 seconds. The squad fell back as the countdown hit 0. The explosion rocked the battlefield, the cannon crumbling in a cascade of fire and matter. Van down. More to go. Vasquez watched the explosion from her command platform. The tide of battle had shifted once more. The Dominion's last act of defiance was crumbling before humanity's relentless advance. She turned to her officers. Finish this. Across the battlefield, human forces pushed forward with renewed vigor. Van by van, the Dominion's war machines fell, their desperate resistance breaking under the unstoppable might of the human war machine. The sun began to rise over Ta, now, casting its golden light upon a world that had, at last, returned to its rightful owners. The command center aboard the UNS Perseverance was a hive of activity. Holographic displays flickered as officers relayed tactical data, tracking the Dominion's defensive efforts. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood at the center of it all, her arms crossed as she analyzed the beta feeds. Ta, now was nearly under full human control, but the sudden activation of the Dominion's hidden weapon platforms had complicated matters. One of their destroyers had already been lost to a surprise energy blast from below, and if they didn't neutralize the remaining cannons, more ships would follow. The comms officer turned to her, his expression tense. Ma'am, orbiter scans confirm at least 5 more of those cannons spread across the city ruins. They appear to be shielded. Our current artillery strikes are barely scratching them. Vasquez narrowed her eyes. The Dominion had clearly prepared for an apocalyptic last stand. We need those shields down. Deploy infiltration teams to disable their power sources. Once the shields are down, I want everything we've got focused on those cannons. The officer nodded and relayed the order. Down on the surface, Sergeant Cole and his squad had barely caught their breath after destroying the first cannon. The explosion still echoed in their ears as they regrouped near the ruins of a collapsed tower. Their armor was scorched, their weapons running hot, but there was no time to rest. Command just confirmed 5 more of those things, Cole muttered, checking his rifle. And they're shielded. That means we're going in close again. His squad exchanged looks, weary but resolute. They had fought through hell to get this far. What was a little more? The comms crackled as a transmission came through. Raptor team, we have intel on an energy substation a few blocks from your position. If you disable it, the shields should drop for at least 2 of the cannons. Cole nodded. Copy that. Moving now. They advanced through the streets, sticking to cover as the Minion patrols searched for them. The enemy knew what was at stake, and every remaining soldier fought with the desperation of the doomed. The sky rumbled as human air support strafed enemy positions, fireballs blooming in the distance. The ground war was turning, but unless those cannons were silenced, the victory would be. The substation was heavily guarded. A Dominion battalion had dug in, their fortifications lined with pulse turrets and automated drones. Cole studied the enemy positions from behind a wrecked vehicle. "We're not getting through that without a distraction." One of his soldiers, a demolitions expert named Harris, grinned. "I've got just the thing." Moments later, a carefully placed explosive detonated on the far side of the compound, sending Dominion troops scrambling. Cole took the opportunity. "Move!" His squad surged forward, cutting down the distracted guards with brutal efficiency. Plasma bolts whizzed past as they fought their way to the main power terminal. Harris knelt beside the control panel, fingers flying over the alien interface. Come on, a sudden roar made Cole turn. A towering Dominion war beast, clad in heavy armor and wielding a massive energy blade, charged straight at them. Cole barely had time to react before it was upon them, swinging the blade in a devastating arc. He threw himself backward, barely avoiding the lethal strike. His squad opened fire, their rounds sparking uselessly against the beast's armor. It was built for war, designed to be unstoppable. But nothing was truly unstoppable. Cole rolled to his feet and fired at its exposed joints, aiming for weak points. The beast snarled, staggering slightly. His Private Tanaka saw the opening. She grabbed a grenade, sprinted forward, and jammed it into the gap in the armor before diving away. The explosion sent the beast reeling, its armor cracking apart. Cole didn't hesitate. He emptied his rifle into the exposed flesh, finishing the job. The Dominion warrior collapsed, its massive form shaking the ground. Harris let out a breath of relief as the power terminal beeped. "Shields are down." The squad cheered, but their victory was. The remaining Dominion forces were regrouping fast. "Time to go," Cole shouted as the squad fell back, weaving through enemy fire as they escaped into the ruins. Above, Vasquez saw the change on her holographic display. 2 of the 5 enemy cannons were now vulnerable. All units, fire at will. From A-orbit, human warships unleashed devastation. Plasma lances and kinetic bombardments rained down, striking the exposed cannons with pinpoint accuracy. Van erupted in a massive fireball, its structure collapsing into the ruins. The second tried to return fire, but before it could, a squadron of human bombers roared overhead, releasing payloads that shattered it into pieces. Vasquez allowed herself a small nod. Progress. But the battle was far from over. The remaining 3 cannons were still operational, and Dominion reinforcements had begun emerging from hidden underground tunnels. Humanity had underestimated how deep their defenses ran. This wasn't just a last stand, it was a death trap, and the Dominion was willing to take as many humans with them as possible. Vasquez clenched her jaw. Prepare for the next assault. Back on the ground, Cole and his squad reached an extraction point as gunships swooped in to pick them up. The battle had taken its toll. Many were wounded, and some hadn't made it. But there was no time to mourn. As their gunship lifted off, he looked down at the burning city below. The Dominion refused to surrender, but neither would humanity. This war would end, one way or another. The battle for Ta now had entered its bloodiest phase. The Dominion's last 3 cannons remained operational, and they had fortified their positions with layers of defenses that even A-orbiter bombardment struggled to crack. In the war room aboard the UNS Perseverance, Admiral Helena Vasquez studied the flickering tactical displays with narrowed eyes. The Dominion had committed every last soldier, every remaining war machine, and all their desperation into holding their ground. The longer those cannons remained active, the greater the risk to the fleet in A-orbit. She turned to her officers. "We need those guns down. Now. Send in the Valkyrie squads. No more." On the surface, Captain Elias Ward led his elite Special Forces team, Valkyrie Squad, through the ruins of the city. And like the standard infantry, the Valkyries were equipped with, allowing them to move faster, hit harder, and withstand devastating attacks. Their mission was simple: get close enough to the enemy artillery to plant charges and wipe them off the map. Simple, but not easy. The Dominion had entrenched themselves behind energy barriers, automated turrets, and squads of elite warriors who would rather die than surrender. Ward motioned his team forward, his HUD highlighting weak points in the enemy's defenses. Valkyries, on me. We're cutting through. The first engagement was immediate and brutal. Dominion sharpshooters fired from the rooftops while heavily armored shock troopers advanced on their position. Plasma rounds seared the air as the two sides clashed. Ward activated his thrusters, launching himself over cover and landing directly into the enemy lines. His blade ignited as he drove it into a Dominion soldier's chest, twisting before tearing it free. Behind him, his team worked with terrifying precision, laying down covering fire while another soldier lobbed an electromagnetic grenade that shorted out the turrets. The first defensive line had fallen, but the main artillery site was still a gauntlet away. The second Dominion cannon loomed ahead, its shield generator buried deep within a fortified complex. Ward grimaced. No way to take it out from a distance. They had to go in. He motioned to his demolitions expert, Reyes. "You're on the generator. We'll cover you." Reyes nodded, clutching a satchel of explosives. The squad moved fast, clearing the narrow corridors of the complex, every step filled with gunfire and chaos. The Dominion had turned the structure into a kill zone, with barricades and automated drones lying in wait. Valkyrie squad pushed forward, sustaining injuries but refusing to slow. When Reyes finally reached the generator room, he wasted no time, setting the charges while Ward and the others held the enemy at bay. 10 seconds. Reyes shouted over the gunfire. Ward checked his ammo. "Make it 5. The explosion rocked the facility, sending a shockwave through the ruins. The shield collapsed, and moments later, a barrage from human bombers tore through the artillery piece, sending debris flying in all directions. One more down. But there was no time to celebrate. The last two cannons were already adjusting their aim, targeting the Perseverance itself. If they fired, it could cripple the flagship. "Move, move, move!" Ward barked, his team sprinting through the ruins toward the final targets. The last Dominion cannon was the most heavily guarded. Here, the enemy had deployed their most fearsome warriors, massive bioengineered brutes clad in power armor, wielding energy weapons that could vaporize a human in an instant. Ward and his team knew they had no chance in a direct fight. Instead, they used speed and deception. Smoke grenades filled the air as Valkyrie squad moved like ghosts, using their to leap between ruined buildings and strike from unexpected angles. Explosions rattled the city as they engaged in brutal combat. Ward drove his blade through one of the Dominion brutes, narrowly avoiding a counterattack that would have crushed his skull. Meanwhile, Reyes and another soldier worked to disable the final shield generator. This time, the Dominion was ready. An energy field blocked their entry, and a countdown had begun on a Dominion console. The enemy was willing to destroy the cannon rather than let it fall. "We need to shut this down now," Reyes shouted, frantically trying to hack the system. The timer ticked down. 30 seconds. 20. Ward fought his way to them, his armor sparking from enemy fire. He glanced at the console, then at Reyes. "Can't shut it down, but we can redirect it." Reyes understood immediately. Instead of disabling the countdown, he rerouted the explosion to detonate outward, taking the last of the Dominion's forces with it. "Time to go." The team sprinted for cover as the cannon erupted in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Above, Vasquez saw the explosion from a orbit. The last of the Dominion's defenses were gone. "All ships, target the final cannon." End this. The sky lit up as every available warship rained fire down on the remaining artillery. The Dominions' last hope was reduced to nothing but molten slag. Ward and his team emerged from the ruins, battered but alive. The battle was over. The Dominion was finished. He looked to the sky as human drop ships descended, securing the city for good. The war was ending, and a new era was about to begin. The silence after the battle was eerie. The Dominion stronghold lay in ruins, its towering structures reduced to rubble, the air thick with the acrid scent of burnt metal and scorched earth. The fires of war still smoldered in the distance, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. Human soldiers moved through the wreckage, securing what remained of the enemy forces, but there were few left to resist. Most of the Dominion warriors had either fallen in battle or fled into the wilderness, their empire reduced to nothing more than scattered survivors. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood at the edge of what had once been the Dominion's grand citadel, her gaze unwavering as she watched the last vestiges of their power crumble. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the weight of victory sat heavy on her shoulders. Captain Elias Ward and his Valkyrie squad approached, their armor scorched and battered, but their stance still strong. They had been the tip of the spear, the ones who had fought through the enemy's final defenses, who had stood with the last of the Dominion's warriors and emerged victorious. Ward pulled off his helmet, running a hand through his hair as he surveyed the destruction. He knew what this movement meant. They weren't just soldiers in a war. They were the executioners of an empire. He turned to Vasquez, his expression grim. "It's done," he said simply. Vasquez nodded, exhaling slowly. "I know." She turned back to the ruins, watching as human engineers planted the flag of the United Terran Federation in the heart of what was once Dominion territory. The banner unfurled in the wind, illuminated by the flickering fires of the battlefield. A declaration to the galaxy that humanity was here to stay. There would be no more Dominion, no more war, at least not this one. The Supreme Chancellor of the Dominion, Varos, knelt in the rubble of his fallen palace, his robes now litter more than tattered rags. His crown, a symbol of his people's power, lay dented and discarded beside him. He did not beg, did not plead. His golden eyes met Vasquez's with a quiet resignation. "You have what you came for," he said, his voice weary but unbroken. "My people are gone. My world is yours. Is this what you wanted?" Vasquez studied him for a moment before speaking. "We wanted peace. But peace was never an option, was it?" Let out a hollow chuckle. "No, it never was. Not with your kind." Ward clenched his jaw but said nothing. The Dominion had underestimated humanity. They had broken the ancient pact, the agreement among the great galactic powers to leave humanity alone. They had seen Earth as weak, as primitive. And they had paid the price. The galaxy would remember this day, not just as the fall of the Dominion, but as the rise of humanity. Reached down, picking up his broken crown, turning it over in his hands before looking back at Vasquez. "And what now? Will you kill me? Parade me before your people like some conquered relic?" Vasquez didn't answer immediately. She had spent her entire career fighting this war, leading humanity to this moment. And now, standing over the fallen ruler of what was once the most powerful empire in the sector, she felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the weight of what had been lost. "You live," she said at last. "Not as a ruler, not as a symbol, but as a reminder." Smirked bitterly. "A reminder of what?" Ward stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "That no one will ever threaten humanity again." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. The cleanup began almost immediately. Human forces worked to secure the remains of the Dominion's infrastructure, salvaging what they could, dismantling what they couldn't. Drop ships moved in and out of the ruined city, ferrying wounded soldiers back to orbit, transporting prisoners to holding cells. The remnants of the Dominion's forces were rounded up, some too wounded to resist, others too exhausted to fight. Some still glared at their human captors with defiant eyes, but most simply stared blankly, their spirits broken. Ward and his team walked through the ruins, their boots kicking up dust and ash with every step. They had fought countless battles, had seen entire worlds burn, but this felt different. This wasn't just another victory. This was the end of something, and the beginning of something new. As the last Dominion banner was turned down, Vasquez turned to Ward. "We've changed the balance of power in the galaxy today." Ward nodded. "Let's hope we tipped it in the right direction." Above them, the human fleet remained in formation, an unbreakable wall of steel and firepower that now controlled this world. Humanity had come to claim its place among the stars, and nothing would stand in their way. The war was over. But the echoes of what they had done here would ripple through the universe for generations.